An elderly woman thought her adopted son was taking her to a nursing home, fearing she was being left alone. But then, he took her on incredible adventures that rekindled their bond and revealed a heartwarming secret. Why did he choose unforgettable experiences over what she feared? And how did this unexpected twist change their lives forever? Don't miss this touching story of love, trust, and surprising redemption. Before we get into the story, comment below where in the world you are watching from today. The morning sun streamed through the kitchen windows of Margaret Thompson's well-kept home, casting a warm glow on the family photos that lined the walls. Margaret stood at the counter, her silver hair neatly styled, humming Moon River as she prepared her morning tea. The familiar scent of Earl Grey filled the air, mingling with the aroma of fresh toast and scrambled eggs. "Mom, did you take your morning pills?" Daniel asked, entering the kitchen with a gentle smile. He carried a small medical kit, his daily routine as familiar as the sunrise. Margaret's eyes sparkled with affection. "Not yet, dear. I was just about to." She paused her humming to accept the glass of water Daniel offered. In the background, Lily juggled her laptop and a spatula, managing her work emails while preparing lunch for later. Her organizational skills showed in the way she moved efficiently between tasks, never missing a beat. "Grandma, can you tell us about the time you went fishing with Grandpa?" Emma asked, carefully placing forks and knives on the kitchen table. Her brother Noah followed behind with the plates, his tongue stuck out in concentration. Margaret chuckled, her face lighting up at the memory. "Oh, that was quite a day. Your grandfather insisted he knew exactly where the fish were biting. Instead, he ended up catching his hat when he cast the line. The children giggled, and even Daniel smiled as he checked his mother's blood pressure." After breakfast, Margaret made her way to the small garden in the backyard. She knelt carefully beside her beloved roses, pruning shears in hand. The morning dew still clung to the petals, and she took a moment to inhale their sweet fragrance. "Now, where did I put my glasses?" she muttered, patting her pockets. The glasses sat perched on top of her head, a fact that Daniel noticed as he came to check on her. "They're right here, Mom," he said kindly, gently touching the top of her head. Margaret laughed at herself, but a flicker of uncertainty crossed her face. Back inside, Margaret stood before the mantelpiece, adjusting the family photos. "This one was from Emma's 7th birthday," she said, pointing to a photo that was actually from Noah's recent school play. Lily exchanged a quick glance with Daniel but maintained her warm smile. "Has anyone seen my keys?" Margaret asked suddenly, her hands searching her pockets. "I need to get the mail." "Mom, I brought the mail in earlier," Daniel reminded her softly. "Remember? We looked through it together after breakfast." "Oh yes, of course," Margaret replied, smoothing her cardigan. "Silly me." The family gathered in the living room, settling into their usual spots. The morning light filled the space with a cozy warmth, and the children sat cross-legged on the carpet near their grandmother's feet. "So, about the family reunion next month," Daniel began, pulling out his phone to check the details. Aunt Sarah and Uncle Jim confirmed they're coming from Charleston. Margaret's face lit up with joy as she looked around at her loving family. Her smile radiated contentment and gratitude for these precious moments together. As the conversation continued, she turned her gaze toward the window, watching the leaves dance in the morning breeze, a subtle shadow of concern crossing her features as she contemplated what lay ahead. The late afternoon sun painted golden streaks across the Thompsons' kitchen table, where Daniel and Lily sat huddled together, their voices barely above a whisper. Bills and medical statements lay scattered between them, casting long shadows on the wooden surface. "I don't know how we're going to manage these expenses," Daniel said, running his fingers through his hair. "The insurance only covers so much, and Mom's medication costs keep rising." Lily reached across the table, placing her hand over his. "We'll figure something out. Maybe we could look into additional coverage options." Daniel shook his head, his shoulders tense. "I've already checked. The premiums would be astronomical at her age." He shuffled through the papers, pointing at various numbers. "And if we need full-time care soon..." "I know," Lily sighed. "I've been researching some facilities just in case. They're not cheap either, but we might need to consider. The soft creak of floorboards made them both look up. Margaret stood in the doorway, wearing her favorite blue cardigan, a gentle smile on her face. "What are you two discussing so seriously?" she asked, moving toward the refrigerator. Daniel quickly gathered the papers, sliding them into a folder. "Just some boring household stuff, Mom. Nothing important." "Time to start thinking about dinner," Lily added brightly, standing up. "Would you like to help me plan the menu for tomorrow?" Margaret paused, her hand on the refrigerator handle. She'd caught fragments of their conversation, something about time and money, and noticed how they'd immediately changed the subject when she entered. The tension in the room felt thick enough to cut with a knife. "Of course, dear," Margaret replied, maintaining her cheerful demeanor despite the knot forming in her stomach. "I was thinking we could make that chicken casserole everyone loves." As she moved around the kitchen, gathering ingredients, Margaret couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. She'd seen that worried look on Daniel's face before, the same expression he'd worn when discussing her recent doctor's appointments. "The tomatoes from the garden are ready to harvest," Margaret said, trying to keep her voice steady. "Noah could help me pick them tomorrow." "That sounds wonderful, Mom," Daniel responded, but his smile didn't quite reach his eyes. Margaret excused herself after a few minutes, mentioning she needed to check on her flowers. As she left the kitchen, she heard their voices drop back to whispers, confirming her suspicions that something wasn't right. Daniel and Lily exchanged concerned looks across the table. Once they were sure Margaret was out of earshot, they pulled the papers back out, their heads close together as they resumed their difficult discussion about the future. Meanwhile, Margaret made her way to her beloved garden, where the evening sun cast long shadows across her carefully tended flower beds. She tried to focus on the blooming roses, but her mind kept wandering back to the worried faces of her son and daughter-in-law, and the hushed conversation she'd interrupted. Margaret sat in her favorite armchair, the well-worn leather creaking softly as she turned the pages of her family photo album. Afternoon sunlight streamed through the window, illuminating pictures of birthdays, holidays, and quiet family moments. Her fingers traced over a photograph of Daniel's adoption day, her heart swelling with love at the memory. A gentle knock at the door pulled her attention away from the album. Daniel stood in the doorway, his expression serious yet kind. "Mom, do you have a minute? I'd like to talk with you about something important." Margaret's heart skipped a beat as she closed the album, placing it carefully on the side table. "Of course, sweetheart." Daniel pulled up a chair and sat across from her, leaning forward with his hands clasped. "Mom, we need to go somewhere soon." "I need you to pack a bag," he said gently. "Just some clothes, your essential items, and your medications. We don't need to rush, but it would be good to have it ready." "When?" Margaret's voice came out barely above a whisper. "Soon. For now, try not to worry about the details. I'll explain everything when we're on our way." Daniel reached out and squeezed her hand. "Trust me, okay?" Margaret's mind raced back to the hushed conversation she'd overheard in the kitchen. The pieces started falling into place, the worried looks, the whispered discussions about money, and now this request. Her chest tightened as she imagined being moved to a nursing home, away from her family, her garden, her memories. In the doorway, Lily stood quietly, offering a supportive smile that didn't quite mask her concern. "Everything will be all right, Mom," Daniel assured her, though his careful choice of words did little to ease her fears. "We're doing what's best for you." After Daniel left the room, Margaret moved slowly to her bedroom. She pulled out her old suitcase from the closet, its familiar floral pattern now seeming less cheerful than before. With trembling hands, she began to fold her favorite dresses. The blue one she wore to Emma's school play, the yellow one from Noah's birthday party. She placed her medications in a small bag, then wrapped several framed photographs in soft sweaters. Her fingers lingered on a picture of her late husband, smiling broadly on their last anniversary together. Tears welled up in her eyes as she carefully tucked it between layers of clothing. Margaret's attention turned to the photographs scattered before her. She picked up one showing her late husband James at their favorite picnic spot, his smile as bright as the summer day. "Oh, James," she whispered, running her finger along the frame's edge. I wish you were here to tell me what to do." The Christmas photo from last year caught her eye next. Everyone gathered around the decorated tree, Emma and Noah wearing matching sweaters, their faces glowing with joy. Margaret's heart swelled with love as she carefully wrapped each frame in soft clothing before placing them in her bag. Each item she packed felt like another goodbye to the life she'd built in this house. The tears she'd been holding back finally spilled over, rolling silently down her cheeks as she continued her task. The evening settled over the Thompson household like a heavy blanket, bringing with it an unusual stillness. Margaret sat in her favorite armchair in the living room, surrounded by neatly packed bags. The soft ticking of the grandfather clock in the corner marked time's steady march forward. Taking out her writing pad, Margaret penned a note to her grandchildren. Her handwriting, though slightly shaky, remained neat as she wrote words of love and encouragement. She tucked the note safely in her purse, saving it for the right moment. "Grandma!" Noah's voice broke through her reverie as he bounded into the living room, followed by his sister Emma. "Can we play Monopoly?" Margaret smiled, grateful for the distraction. "Of course, my darlings." They settled around the coffee table, carefully moving aside the remaining photographs. Emma took charge of being the banker, her face serious as she distributed the colorful money. Noah chose the dog token, as he always did, making it bark and hop across the board. "Remember when you taught us to play, Grandma?" Emma asked, sorting the property cards. "You said it was Dad's favorite game when he was little." "That's right," Margaret nodded, watching her grandchildren with loving eyes. "He always wanted to be the top hat, just like your grandfather." As they played, Margaret shared stories about their father's childhood, about wonderful family moments that made them all laugh. Though sadness lingered beneath the surface, the warmth of their togetherness brightened the evening. Later, as night descended and the house grew quiet, Margaret returned to her armchair by the window. The Christmas photo rested in her lap, its happy scene blurring as tears filled her eyes. She gazed out into the darkness, her shoulders shaking with silent sobs, fear and uncertainty weighing heavily on her heart. The late afternoon sun cast long shadows across Margaret's backyard as she sat on the wooden porch swing, a cup of chamomile tea warming her hands. Emma and Noah's laughter filled the air as they chased each other through her prized rose garden, careful not to disturb the blooming flowers. "Emma, Noah, come here, darlings," Margaret called out, patting the space beside her on the swing. "I want to show you something special." The children bounded up the porch steps, their cheeks flushed from playing. Margaret reached beside her and pulled out a weathered cardboard box filled with photographs and small treasures. "This," she said, holding up a slightly faded photograph, "is from the day your daddy came to live with me." In the picture, a young Daniel stood next to Margaret, both wearing bright smiles. "He was just about your age, Noah." Emma leaned in closer, her eyes wide with curiosity. "How did you meet Dad, Grandma?" Margaret's eyes softened at the memory. "I was volunteering at the children's center, and there was this quiet boy who loved to read books in the corner. He reminded me so much of your grandfather." She pulled out another photo, this one showing Daniel reading on a familiar-looking porch swing. "We connected right away, and soon after he became my son." Noah pointed to an old wooden toy car in the box. "What's that, Grandma?" "That was your daddy's favorite toy," Margaret explained, carefully lifting it out. "We used to spend hours racing it across the living room floor." They moved to the kitchen, where Margaret taught them how to make her famous chocolate chip cookies. Flour dusted their faces as they laughed and mixed ingredients together. The warm, sweet smell filled the house, bringing back countless memories of baking with Daniel when he was young. Later, they gathered in the living room to watch home videos on the old VCR. The screen flickered with images of past Christmases, birthdays, and family picnics. Emma and Noah giggled at the sight of their father as a teenager, and Margaret's heart swelled with joy at their shared delight. "I have something special for each of you," Margaret said, reaching into her pocket. She handed Emma a delicate silver locket. Inside was a tiny photo of their family from last Christmas. For Noah, she produced a small wooden train engine carefully carved and painted. Your grandfather made this when your daddy was little." The children's eyes lit up at their gifts. Emma immediately put on the locket, while Noah ran the train along the coffee table, making soft, chugging sounds. "Thank you, Grandma," they exclaimed in unison, wrapping their arms around her in a tight hug. As evening approached, they settled in front of the crackling fireplace. The warm glow illuminated their faces as Emma and Noah snuggled close to their grandmother, one on each side. "We love you so much, Grandma," Emma whispered, her head resting on Margaret's shoulder. Margaret held them close, breathing in the moment, their presence a balm to her worried heart. The morning sun crept through Margaret's bedroom window, casting gentle rays across her quilted bedspread. She opened her eyes slowly, the weight of the day ahead settling heavily on her shoulders. The familiar sounds of early morning, birds chirping, the distant hum of traffic, seemed somehow different today, more final. Daniel knocked softly before entering with a breakfast tray. "Good morning, Mom," he said, his voice gentle. "I brought your favorite, blueberry pancakes and fresh coffee." Margaret managed a small smile as Daniel set the tray across her lap. They ate in companionable silence, the unspoken words hanging between them like a delicate curtain. The pancakes, usually a source of joy, tasted different today, less sweet, more mechanical. After breakfast, Daniel helped Margaret select her traveling clothes, a comfortable navy blue dress and her favorite cardigan. His movements were careful and deliberate as he helped her dress, making sure everything was just right. "Grandma," Emma said, rushing forward to hug Margaret, "I'm wearing the locket you gave me." "And I've got my train," Noah added, holding it up proudly. The family gathered in the living room for a photograph. Lily positioned everyone carefully, trying to capture their usual warmth despite the circumstances. The camera clicked, preserving their forced smiles and damp eyes. Daniel carried Margaret's bags to the car while Lily helped her down the front steps. The morning air was crisp, carrying the scent of Margaret's roses from the garden. Emma and Noah followed close behind, their small hands reaching for their grandmothers at every opportunity. As Daniel opened the car door for her, Margaret turned for one last look at her home. The familiar white walls, the carefully tended garden, the porch swing where she'd shared so many stories. It all seemed to blur together through her tears. "It's time, Mom," Daniel said softly, helping her into the passenger seat. From the driveway, Lily held Emma and Noah close as they waved goodbye. Emma clutched her locket while Noah raised his wooden train in farewell. Margaret watched them through the rear window as Daniel started the car, her heart aching with each passing moment. "Try to relax, Mom," Daniel said as they pulled away from the curb. "Everything will be fine." But Margaret couldn't shake the feeling of dread as she watched her home and her family grow smaller in the side mirror. The afternoon stretched on as Daniel's car cruised down the highway. Margaret sat quietly in the passenger seat, her hands folded in her lap, watching the landscape blur past her window. The silence between them felt heavy, broken only by the soft hum of the engine and occasional traffic sounds. Daniel glanced at his mother from time to time, his knuckles white on the steering wheel. Without warning, he turned off their expected route, guiding the car onto an exit ramp. "Daniel," Margaret questioned, sitting up straighter, "where are we going?" A smile tugged at the corners of Daniel's mouth. "I have a surprise for you, Mom. Something special." Margaret's confusion grew as they approached the Staples Center, its massive structure gleaming in the late afternoon sun. The streets buzzed with energy as crowds of people streamed toward the entrance, many wearing purple and gold Lakers jerseys. "Oh my goodness," Margaret whispered, her eyes widening as memories flooded back. She'd always wanted to see a Lakers game in person but had never had the chance. "We've got VIP access," Daniel announced proudly as he parked the car. "The best seats in the house." At the ticket counter, Margaret could barely contain her excitement. Her earlier anxiety melted away as they made their way through the arena's entrance. The atmosphere was electric, the squeak of sneakers on the court, the thunderous cheers of the crowd, and the pulsing music filled the air. Their seats were incredibly close to the court, offering a perfect view of the action. Margaret leaned forward, completely absorbed in the game. When the Lakers scored, she jumped up with surprising energy, high-fiving Daniel and cheering along with the crowd. "Daniel, this is wonderful," she exclaimed, her eyes sparkling with joy. "I can't believe you remembered how much I wanted to see a game." Daniel pulled out his phone, capturing photos of their special moment together. Margaret's smile was radiant as she posed with him, the basketball court serving as their backdrop. The worries that had plagued her earlier seemed to fade away, replaced by the pure joy of sharing this experience with her son. As the final buzzer sounded, Margaret turned to Daniel, her eyes brimming with happy tears. "Thank you, sweetheart," she said, squeezing his hand. "This means more to me than you could know." The evening air was crisp as Daniel and Margaret left the Staples Center, both still energized from the Lakers game. Margaret hummed contentedly in the passenger seat, her earlier fears temporarily forgotten in the glow of their shared experience. "The day's not over yet, Mom," Daniel said with a mysterious smile. "I've got one more surprise for you." "Another one?" Margaret's eyes sparkled with curiosity. "Daniel, you're spoiling me." As they drove through the city streets, Daniel reached into the glove compartment and pulled out 2 tickets. "How do you feel about seeing Elton John tonight?" Margaret gasped, her hands flying to her mouth. "Elton John? Oh, Daniel!" She could hardly believe it. She'd played his records countless times over the years, dancing around the kitchen while cooking dinner. The concert venue glowed with vibrant lights as they approached. Crowds of people streamed toward the entrance, their excited chatter filling the air. Daniel guided Margaret through the doors, and they found their seats in the packed theater. When Elton John took the stage, the crowd erupted in cheers. Margaret stood up, clapping enthusiastically. As the first notes of "Your Song" filled the air, tears welled up in her eyes. She swayed to the music, singing along to every word. Daniel watched his mother with joy, seeing how the music transformed her. During Tiny Dancer, Margaret grabbed Daniel's hands, and they danced together right there by their seats. Her movements were graceful and free, reminding Daniel of old family videos where she danced with his father. During a quieter moment, Elton spoke about love and resilience, his words touching something deep in Margaret's heart. She thought of her late husband, remembering how they used to slow dance to "Can You Feel the Love Tonight" in their living room. "This next song," Elton announced, "is for everyone who's ever loved deeply." As Your Song began to play, Margaret reached for Daniel's hand, squeezing it tightly. Tears rolled down her cheeks, but her smile never wavered as she sang along, her voice joining the chorus of thousands. The concert was magical, filled with moments of pure joy and deep emotion. As the final encore ended and the lights came up, Margaret and Daniel made their way out of the venue, their hearts full of the evening's memories. Under the twinkling city lights, Margaret looked at her son with profound gratitude, realizing that perhaps her fears about the future had been misplaced. The highway stretched ahead as Daniel and Margaret left Atlanta behind, their hearts still singing with the echoes of Elton John's music. Margaret leaned back in her seat, watching the familiar Georgia landscape roll past her window. The concert tickets lay carefully folded in her purse, precious souvenirs of an unforgettable evening. As they drove through the night, the city lights gradually faded, replaced by the gentle glow of stars above. Margaret's eyes grew heavy, but she fought sleep, not wanting to miss a moment of this journey. She hummed softly, remembering the concert's magical moments. "You should rest, Mom," Daniel said gently. "We've still got a few hours until Savannah." Margaret smiled and closed her eyes, letting memories of her childhood home fill her thoughts. When she opened them again, the sun was rising over Savannah's historic streets. Her heart quickened as Daniel turned onto familiar roads lined with ancient oak trees draped in Spanish moss. The car pulled up to a beautiful 2-story house with a wraparound porch. Margaret's hands trembled as she recognized her childhood home, perfectly maintained and surrounded by blooming azaleas and camellias. "Oh, Daniel," she whispered, tears welling in her eyes. "It's exactly as I remember it." Daniel helped her from the car and they walked up the brick pathway together. The front door key turned smoothly in the lock, and Margaret stepped into the foyer, her hand trailing along the familiar wallpaper. In the living room, she touched the antique piano where she had practiced countless hours as a child. The dining room still held the large mahogany table where her family had gathered for Sunday dinners. Each room held precious memories that came flooding back. "Look," she said, pointing to a mark on the kitchen doorframe. That's where Daddy measured our heights every year. There's my mark from when I was 12. They climbed to the attic where Margaret found boxes of old photographs and letters. She sat on an old trunk, carefully lifting out black and white images of her parents and siblings. "This was taken at my 16th birthday party," she explained, showing Daniel a faded photograph. "Your grandfather built that gazebo in the backyard just for the occasion." Daniel led her through the house, pointing out the careful restoration work that had preserved its historic charm while adding modern comforts. In the backyard garden, they sat on a wooden bench surrounded by climbing roses and jasmine. Margaret breathed in the familiar sense of her childhood home, feeling a deep sense of peace settle over her. The sound of birds singing in the oak trees and the gentle breeze rustling through the garden brought back countless memories of summer afternoons spent in this very spot. "Thank you for bringing me here," she said softly to Daniel, squeezing his hand. Her eyes shone with gratitude as she looked at her son, overwhelmed by the thoughtfulness of this gift. The morning sun cast long shadows across the bustling streets of New York City as Daniel and Margaret approached the Metropolitan Museum of Art. Margaret's eyes widened at the sight of the magnificent building, its classical architecture standing proud against the urban backdrop. "I can't believe I'm finally here," Margaret whispered, her voice trembling with excitement. She clutched Daniel's arm as they climbed the grand steps leading to the entrance. Inside, the vast hall stretched before them, filled with treasures from across centuries and continents. Margaret's breath caught as she took in the soaring ceilings and marble columns. Daniel gently guided her through the galleries, starting with the European paintings. "Look, Mom," Daniel said softly, pointing to Van Gogh's Starry Night. Margaret stood transfixed before the swirling blues and yellows, tears welling in her eyes. "The way he captured the night sky," she murmured. "It's exactly how I remember the nights your father and I spent stargazing in our backyard." They moved through the galleries slowly, Margaret pausing to study each masterpiece. At Rembrandt's The Night Watch, she spent several minutes examining the play of light and shadow, sharing memories of art books she'd collected over the years. In a quiet corner of the museum, they discovered an interactive art space. Margaret's face lit up as Daniel encouraged her to try painting. She carefully selected colors, creating a small landscape inspired by her childhood home in Savannah. Daniel watched proudly as she worked, noting how her hands moved with surprising steadiness across the canvas. "Your father would have loved this," Margaret said softly as they sat in front of a peaceful landscape painting. "We always talked about visiting the great museums together." She squeezed Daniel's hand, her eyes bright with emotion. Throughout the afternoon, they explored every corner of the museum. Margaret shared stories about each artistic style they encountered, her knowledge surprising even Daniel. In the modern art wing, she laughed delightedly at the unexpected installations, her joy echoing through the quiet galleries. Daniel observed his mother's transformation as she immersed herself in the art world she had always loved from afar. Her earlier anxiety seemed to melt away, replaced by a profound sense of peace and wonder. She moved from piece to piece with growing confidence, her commentary becoming more animated and insightful. In a serene gallery filled with impressionist paintings, they took a moment to rest. Margaret sat on a bench, gazing at Monet's water lilies, while Daniel watched her face reflect the same tranquility found in the artwork before them. The city lights twinkled like stars as Daniel navigated the car through New York's busy streets. Margaret sat quietly in the passenger seat, her heart full from their remarkable day at the Metropolitan Museum of Art. Her fingers traced the outline of the small painting she had created, now carefully protected in a museum folder on her lap. As they merged onto the highway, Margaret's thoughts drifted to the whirlwind of experiences they'd shared. The Lakers game, Elton John's concert, their visit to her childhood home in Savannah, and now the art museum. Each memory brought a warm smile to her face. The highway stretched before them as they discussed each special moment they'd shared. Margaret's eyes welled with tears as she recalled the thrill of the basketball game, the joy of singing along with Elton John, and the peace she'd felt walking through her old family home. They shared a quiet laugh about Margaret's enthusiasm during the Lakers game, remembering how she'd jumped up from her seat, cheering louder than fans half her age. The memory brought light to both their faces. Daniel reached over and squeezed her hand, their shared understanding deeper than words could express. The fear and uncertainty that had weighed so heavily on Margaret's heart just days ago had transformed into something beautiful, a renewed appreciation for the bond they shared and the love that had always been there. The morning sun filtered through the kitchen windows as Margaret and Daniel shared a quiet breakfast. Daniel had prepared her favorite blueberry pancakes, and the aroma of fresh coffee filled the air. Margaret noticed how he seemed particularly attentive today, refilling her cup before she could ask and ensuring her plate was never empty. "I have one last special outing planned for us today, Mom," Daniel said, his voice gentle. "I think you'll really enjoy it." Margaret nodded, trying to keep her smile steady despite the weight in her chest. She wondered if this would be their final day together before what she feared was inevitable. At the botanical gardens, the spring flowers were in full bloom. Rows of tulips created a rainbow of colors, and cherry blossoms floated on the gentle breeze. Daniel guided Margaret along the winding paths, his arm linked with hers for support. "Remember when we used to garden together?" Margaret asked, pausing to admire a patch of vibrant daisies. "You were always so patient, even when I made you replant those rose bushes 3 times to get them just right." Daniel laughed warmly. "Those roses turned out beautiful thanks to your persistence." They stopped at a peaceful pond surrounded by weeping willows. Margaret watched the koi fish swim lazy circles in the clear water. "I hope Emma and Noah inherit your love of gardening," she said softly. "It brings such joy to life." As the afternoon drew to a close, Daniel steered the car toward home. Margaret's heart grew heavier as she recognized the familiar streets. When the large brick building of Oakwood Nursing Home came into view, her breath caught in her throat. Tears welled in her eyes as Daniel turned into the parking lot. The facility loomed before them, its windows reflecting the setting sun. Margaret's hands trembled in her lap as she remembered the hushed conversations she'd overheard, the packed bags waiting at home, and all the special outings that now felt like farewell gifts. Daniel's car slowed to a stop. Margaret's fingers tightened around the door handle, her knuckles turning white with tension. Each breath came in short, shallow gasps as she stared at the building that represented her greatest fear. The joy of their recent adventures, the Lakers game, Elton John's concert, the art museum, suddenly felt hollow. In her mind, these precious moments transformed into farewell gifts, final memories before being left behind. Tears welled up in her eyes, blurring her vision of the institutional building before her. "Mom," Daniel said softly, reaching for her hand, "it's going to be okay." But Margaret barely heard him through the rushing in her ears. Her mind raced with fragments of overheard conversations about money and care, each memory striking like a physical blow. The weight of betrayal pressed heavily on her chest as she remembered packing her belongings, choosing which pieces of her life to bring to this new, unwanted chapter. "I thought," she whispered, her voice breaking, "all those wonderful days we shared." Silent tears rolled down her cheeks as she struggled to understand how such beautiful experiences could lead to this moment. Daniel squeezed her hand gently. "Mom, please don't cry." His voice carried concern, but Margaret felt more alone than ever. The connection they'd strengthened over their recent adventures seemed to crumble in the shadow of the nursing home. The building loomed before them, its windows reflecting the dying light of day. Margaret's breath hitched as she recalled the careful way Daniel had helped her pack. His insistence on bringing certain items, his quiet reassurances. Now those memories took on a different meaning, preparation for abandonment rather than care. Daniel opened his car door, the sound making Margaret flinch. She took a deep, shuddering breath, trying to compose herself. Summoning what little strength remained, she managed a weak smile, though her heart felt like it was shattering. With trembling hands, she reached for her door handle as Daniel came around to help her. Together, they walked toward the entrance, each step feeling heavier than the last. Margaret's tears continued to fall silently as they approached the automatic doors, her fear mounting with every step forward. Margaret stepped through the automatic doors of the nursing home, her heart pounding against her ribs. The lobby's bright lights and cheerful decor surprised her. Warm yellows and soft blues replaced the institutional grays she'd imagined. Still, her hands trembled as she clutched her purse closer. "Margaret? Margaret Thompson, is that really you?" The familiar voice cut through her anxiety like a beam of sunshine through clouds. Margaret turned, hardly daring to believe her ears. There, standing near a comfortable seating area, was Susan Mitchell, her dearest childhood friend from Savannah. Susan's silver hair framed the same warm smile Margaret remembered from their youth. "Susan?" Margaret's voice quavered as her friend rushed forward to embrace her. "Oh, my dear friend." Susan wrapped her arms around Margaret, the familiar scent of her lavender perfume bringing back a flood of memories. "I've been waiting for you." Margaret pulled back slightly, confusion written across her face. "You knew I was coming?" "Of course, Daniel arranged everything." Susan gestured to the surrounding space. "Welcome to our little community. Come, let me show you around." As they walked through the building, Susan introduced Margaret to other residents. Each greeting was warmer than the last, with genuine smiles and enthusiastic handshakes. They passed through a sunny art room where residents worked on paintings, a library filled with comfortable reading nooks, and a garden room bursting with plant life. "Remember how we used to garden together?" Susan squeezed Margaret's hand. "We still can, and you won't believe who else is here. Betty Williams from our old church choir and Thomas Parker. You remember him from the corner store?" More familiar faces appeared as they continued their tour. Each reunion brought fresh tears to Margaret's eyes, not of sadness now, but of joy. Betty hugged her tightly, reminiscing about their choir days. Thomas tipped an imaginary hat just as he had done 50 years ago, making both women laugh. "We have book clubs, movie nights, and weekly outings," Susan explained, leading Margaret to a cozy sitting area. "It's like being back in Savannah, but with all the care we need right at hand." They settled into plush armchairs as another resident brought them tea. Margaret's hands had stopped shaking, and the tightness in her chest had dissolved. She looked around at the smiling faces, the comfortable surroundings, and finally at Daniel, who stood nearby watching with gentle eyes. "Remember that time we snuck into Mrs. Henderson's garden to pick strawberries?" Susan asked, her eyes twinkling with mischief. Margaret laughed, the sound surprising her with its freedom. "And she caught us red-handed, literally." The two friends dissolved into giggles, just as they had so many times in their youth. Around them, the nursing home hummed with life and warmth, nothing like the cold institution Margaret had feared. The morning sun streamed through Margaret's window, casting a warm glow across her room. She woke feeling surprisingly refreshed, her mind already turning to thoughts of Susan and the unexpected joy of their reunion. The familiar sounds of activity in the hallway drew her from her bed with an eagerness she hadn't felt in years. Susan was waiting for her in the garden, exactly as they'd planned the night before. The morning air was crisp and clean as they began their walk among the blooming flowers. "Do you remember Mrs. Peterson's garden?" Susan asked, touching a vibrant rose. "How we used to sneak peeks at her prize-winning dahlias?" Margaret laughed, the sound carrying across the peaceful garden. "And the time she caught us and ended up teaching us all about flower arranging instead of scolding us?" Their morning continued with an art class where Margaret found herself holding a paintbrush with trembling excitement. She studied Susan's familiar features as she worked, capturing not just her friend's appearance but the warmth of their shared history on canvas. During lunch in the bright dining room, they joined a table of other residents. The conversation flowed easily as they shared stories of their youth in Savannah. Margaret felt her heart grow lighter with each shared memory and burst of laughter. The afternoon tea session became an intimate gathering of old friends. Margaret's hands wrapped around her warm cup as she spoke about her late husband, sharing stories of their life together. "He loved jazz," she said softly. "Every Sunday evening we'd dance in our living room." Susan reached across the table and squeezed her hand. "I remember how he used to hum while working in your garden," she said. "He always had such a gentle spirit." During the group activity, residents gathered in a circle to share their favorite memories. Margaret found herself opening up about her initial fears of coming to the nursing home. "I was so scared," she admitted, her voice quiet but steady. "I thought I was being sent away, but instead I found my dear friend again." Susan's eyes glistened with tears as she hugged Margaret. "We're together now," she whispered. "Just like old times." As evening approached, they sat together in the garden, watching the sky paint itself in soft pinks and purples. Their hands were clasped together, a comfortable silence between them broken only by occasional shared memories and gentle laughter. "Remember the summer fair of '52? Susan asked suddenly. "When we both wore the same dress and pretended to be twins?" Margaret's laughter rang out clear and true. "And nobody could tell us apart until your mother called you home for dinner." They promised to meet again the next morning, their hearts full with the joy of renewed friendship. As they parted for the evening, Margaret felt a deep sense of peace settle over her. The nursing home no longer seemed like an ending, but rather a new beginning filled with the warmth of rekindled friendship. The next morning, Daniel helped Margaret into the passenger seat of his car as they were heading back to their home. After 2 days of reconnecting with Susan and making new friends, the departure felt bittersweet. Margaret watched the building grow smaller in the side mirror until it disappeared completely. The drive home was quiet, filled only with the soft hum of the engine and the occasional rustle of trees passing by. Margaret's hands fidgeted in her lap as she gathered her courage. Finally, she turned to Daniel, her voice trembling slightly. I thought you were taking me to stay at the nursing home permanently," she confessed, her eyes welling with tears. "All those wonderful outings, the Lakers game, Elton John, the art museum. I believed they were your way of saying goodbye." Daniel let out a nervous laugh, though his eyes reflected a mix of sadness and understanding. "Oh, Mom," he said softly, reaching for her hand. "I would never abandon you like that. I need to tell you something." He explained about her recent medical diagnosis, how the doctors had suggested making the most of their time together. "Those outings weren't goodbye gifts," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "They were my way of giving back to the woman who gave me everything, a home, a family, love." Margaret wiped her eyes with her free hand as Daniel continued. "You're not a burden, Mom. You never have been. I wanted to make sure you experienced all the joy you deserve. The nursing home visit was just to see Susan. I remembered how close you two were in the old days." "I'm so sorry I doubted you," Margaret said, squeezing his hand. "I let my fears get the better of me." "Don't apologize," Daniel replied, his eyes fixed on the road ahead but his grip on her hand tightening. "I should have been more clear about everything. I promise I'll always be here for you, supporting you every step of the way." They spent the remainder of the drive discussing their favorite moments from the past few days. The thrill of the basketball game, the magic of Elton John's music, the beauty of the art museum. Each memory seemed more precious now, wrapped in the warmth of their renewed understanding. As they turned onto their street, Margaret felt lighter than she had in weeks. The fear that had been weighing on her heart had lifted, replaced by a deep appreciation for her son's love and devotion. The car slowed to a stop in their driveway. Margaret turned to Daniel, her eyes shining with gratitude, and pulled him into a tight embrace. "Thank you, Daniel. I never knew how much you cared," she whispered. Daniel's eyes welled up as he replied, "I will always care for you, Mom. Always." Hand in hand, they walked toward their front door, their hearts full of renewed trust and love, ready to cherish the moments they had together. Lily stood by the front door with Emma and Noah, their faces beaming with excitement. As Margaret stepped out of the car, Emma rushed forward, clutching a colorful paper craft in her hands. "Grandma, we made these for you." Emma held up her creation, a carefully folded paper heart decorated with glitter and stickers. Noah followed close behind with his own artwork, a drawing of their family surrounded by stars and hearts. "These are beautiful, my darlings," Margaret said, pulling them both into a tight hug. Lily approached with a steaming cup of tea, just the way Margaret liked it. "Welcome home," Lily said warmly, helping Margaret to her favorite chair on the porch. Throughout the evening, Margaret took her time exploring the house, noticing thoughtful changes that had been made. The bathroom now had sturdy handrails, and additional lamps brightened previously dim corners. Each modification spoke of her family's care and consideration. The kitchen soon filled with delicious aromas as Lily prepared dinner, with Emma and Noah eagerly helping set the table. Stories and laughter flowed freely as they shared their meal together, Margaret feeling the warmth of their love surrounding her. After dinner, they gathered in the living room where Daniel put on some old family videos. They watched footage of past Christmases and birthdays, each memory bringing smiles and occasional happy tears. Later, Margaret found herself alone on the porch, watching the last rays of sunlight fade. Daniel checked on her periodically, bringing fresh tea and making sure she was comfortable. Lily joined her with a warm blanket, while Emma and Noah took turns sharing stories about their days at school. "We love you so much, Grandma," Emma said, snuggling close. "You're the best part of our family." Noah nodded enthusiastically. "Yeah, and we're going to take care of you just like you take care of us." As night settled in, Margaret felt a profound sense of peace. The stars began to appear in the darkening sky, and Daniel joined her on the porch. They sat together in comfortable silence, both feeling the strength of their bond. "Thank you, Daniel. I feel more at home than ever," Margaret whispered. Daniel smiled warmly, reaching for her hand. "I will always be there for you." Together, they watched the stars twinkle above, their hearts full of love and appreciation for each other. A month after Margaret's return home, the Thompson household had settled into a comfortable rhythm. Margaret spent her mornings tending to her small garden, afternoons playing board games with Emma and Noah, and evenings enjoying family dinners filled with laughter and stories. However, subtle changes began to appear in her daily routine. One morning, while watering her beloved roses, Margaret felt unusually winded. She dismissed it as nothing more than the summer heat, but the sensation persisted. Over the next few weeks, a persistent cough developed, which she attributed to seasonal allergies. "It's just the pollen," she assured Daniel when he noticed her wheezing during their evening walks. "Nothing to worry about." But Daniel did worry. He observed how his mother needed more frequent breaks while cooking, how she dozed off during afternoon tea, and how climbing the stairs left her breathless. The vibrant energy that had characterized her presence began to dim. Lily noticed too. She found Margaret resting more often in her favorite armchair, sometimes struggling to catch her breath after simple tasks like folding laundry. Even Emma and Noah sensed something was different, offering to help their grandmother with activities she usually managed easily. "Mom," Daniel said one evening, sitting beside her, "I've noticed you've been having trouble breathing lately. I think we should see Dr. Anderson." Margaret tried to wave off his concern. "Oh, sweetheart, it's just age catching up with me. There's no need to make a fuss." But Daniel remained firm. He scheduled an appointment and began keeping detailed notes about her symptoms, the increasing frequency of her coughing fits, episodes of dizziness, and the chest discomfort she tried to hide. At the doctor's office, Margaret underwent various tests. The medical staff drew blood, conducted chest x-rays, and performed pulmonary function tests. Each examination increased the family's anxiety, though they tried to maintain optimistic faces for Margaret's sake. As they waited for results, Margaret's condition deteriorated further. Simple tasks like walking to the kitchen became challenging endeavors. She spent more time in bed, her breathing becoming increasingly labored. That evening, as the family gathered in the living room, Margaret sat in her armchair, her breathing shallow and her face pale with fatigue. The sound of Daniel's phone ringing cut through the quiet atmosphere. It was Dr. Anderson requesting their immediate presence at the hospital. "Everything will be okay, Mom," Daniel assured her, helping her up from the chair. "We'll get through this together." Margaret nodded weakly, looking at her family's worried faces as they prepared for the hospital visit, her heart heavy with unspoken fears. The hospital waiting room buzzed with muted conversations and the soft beeping of distant medical equipment. Margaret sat rigidly in her chair, her hands clasped so tightly her knuckles had turned white. Daniel's footsteps echoed as he paced back and forth, occasionally glancing at the hallway where doctors came and went. Lily sat between Emma and Noah, her arms wrapped protectively around them as they leaned against their grandmother. Time seemed to stretch endlessly until Dr. Ramirez appeared, her face carrying the weight of serious news. "Mrs. Thompson? Mr. Thompson? Would you please follow me to my office?" The walk to the doctor's office felt like miles. Inside, Dr. Ramirez gestured for them to sit down, her expression gentle but grave. "I'm afraid I have difficult news," she began, her voice steady and compassionate. "The tests show that you have idiopathic pulmonary fibrosis, or IPF." Margaret's breath caught in her throat as Dr. Ramirez continued explaining the diagnosis. The doctor's words seemed to echo in the small office. Progressive, incurable, few months to live. Each word fell like a heavy stone in the quiet room. Tears welled up in Margaret's eyes as she gripped Daniel's hand. Daniel stood frozen, his face pale as he processed the devastating news. His free hand trembled slightly as he reached for the tissue box on Dr. Ramirez's desk, offering one to his mother. "We'll focus on palliative care," Dr. Ramirez explained, her voice softening. "Our goal will be to manage the symptoms and ensure your comfort, Mrs. Thompson. We have excellent support services available, including counseling for both you and your family." The family gathered in a tight circle when they returned to the waiting room. Emma pressed close to Margaret's side while Noah buried his face in Lily's shoulder. No words were spoken. None seemed adequate for the moment. Daniel kept his arm around his mother's shoulders, his touch gentle but firm, a silent promise of support. Margaret lifted her chin, drawing a shaky breath as she looked at each beloved face around her. Though her eyes still shimmered with tears, a quiet acceptance began to settle over her features. Daniel met her gaze, his own eyes reflecting both deep sorrow and unwavering love. They held each other close as Dr. Ramirez finished reviewing the care plans. When she stepped away, Margaret and Daniel shared a long embrace, neither speaking but both understanding the profound change that had just entered their lives. The steady beeping of medical equipment filled the hospital room as Margaret lay in her bed, her breathing shallow but steady. Daniel sat beside her, his warm hand gently holding hers. The late afternoon sun cast long shadows through the partially drawn curtains, creating a peaceful atmosphere despite the circumstances. Daniel took a deep breath, his shoulders tensing slightly as he prepared himself for what he needed to say. "Mom," he began softly, "there's something I need to tell you." Margaret turned her head toward him, her eyes tired but alert. Daniel swallowed hard before continuing. "I've known about your diagnosis for months. During your routine checkups, the doctors found signs of idiopathic pulmonary fibrosis." Tears welled up in Margaret's eyes as Daniel explained further. "I couldn't bear to tell you right away. Instead, I wanted to make sure you had experiences that would bring you joy. The Lakers game, Elton John concert, our trip to your childhood home, the Metropolitan Museum. They weren't random outings. They were dreams you'd mentioned over the years, things I knew would make you happy." His voice cracked slightly as he continued. "You gave me everything, Mom. A home, love, support. Things I never had before you adopted me. I wanted to give something back, to show you how much you mean to me." Margaret's grip tightened on Daniel's hand as tears rolled down her cheeks. She listened intently as he spoke about his plans, his fears, and his deep love for her. The relief of understanding washed over her face. She hadn't been abandoned. She had been cherished. Lily entered the room with Emma and Noah joining the intimate moment. Emma moved to Margaret's other side, while Noah climbed carefully onto the foot of the bed. They each shared words of love and support, their presence strengthening the family's bond. "We'll face this together," Daniel assured Margaret, squeezing her hand. "Every day will count, Mom. We'll make sure of it." Margaret looked at her family gathered around her, feeling a profound sense of peace despite her condition. "Thank you, Daniel," she whispered, her voice trembling with emotion. "For everything." Daniel leaned forward and embraced his mother gently, whispering back, "I will always be here for you, Margaret. Every step of the way." The late afternoon sun cast a gentle glow through the hospital room window, creating a warm and comforting atmosphere. Margaret lay in her bed, her breathing shallow but steady, while Daniel sat faithfully by her side, holding her hand. Lily, Emma, and Noah gathered around, forming a protective circle of love and support around her bed. Each morning brought new visitors to Margaret's room. Emma would skip in with handmade cards, while Noah carried small treasures he'd found in the hospital garden. Lily organized their visits carefully, ensuring Margaret always had company and comfort throughout the day. During one particularly touching afternoon, Margaret's eyes lit up as she shared stories from her youth. "I remember the day Daniel came home," she said, her voice soft but clear. "He was so quiet, but those eyes held such hope." Daniel squeezed her hand gently, remembering that life-changing moment. Emma and Noah spread photo albums across Margaret's bed, pointing excitedly at different pictures. "Grandma, remember this Christmas?" Emma asked, indicating a photo where they all wore matching sweaters. Margaret smiled warmly, touching the image with trembling fingers. Lily brought in an easel and watercolors, setting them up by Margaret's bedside. Though her hands shook slightly, Margaret managed to paint simple flowers, her face peaceful as she worked. The artwork, though modest, brought her evident joy and satisfaction. Music filled the room during quiet afternoons. Daniel played Margaret's favorite songs on a small speaker, and sometimes she would hum along, her eyes closed in contentment. The familiar melodies seemed to ease her breathing and bring color to her cheeks. Each evening the family gathered for their special reflection time. "I'm grateful for this moment," Margaret would often say, looking at each face around her with deep love. They shared stories, hopes, and gentle laughter, creating precious memories even within the hospital walls. In the hospital's courtyard, they planted a small garden together. Though Margaret couldn't leave her bed, she helped direct the placement of each flower from her window. "The yellow ones catch the morning sun perfectly," she observed, watching Emma and Noah carefully pat soil around the delicate plants. As night descended, the family joined hands around Margaret's bed, creating an unbroken circle of love. Margaret gazed at each beloved face, her eyes filled with gratitude and peace. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice trembling with emotion. "Thank you all for everything." The room fell into a comfortable silence, filled with the profound sense of love and unity that bound them together. Margaret closed her eyes, comforted by the presence of her family, their hands still linked in an endless chain of support and devotion. The hospital room had become a second home to the Thompson family as Margaret's condition steadily declined. The sterile walls now held colorful drawings from Emma and Noah, while fresh flowers brightened the windowsill each morning. The medical equipment's soft hum provided a constant backdrop to their daily visits. Daniel maintained a careful schedule, ensuring someone was always with Margaret. He would arrive early in the mornings, helping her with breakfast and medication, while Lily would stop by during lunch breaks. The children would visit after school, their presence bringing fresh energy to the room. On Margaret's birthday, they transformed the hospital room into a celebration space. Lily hung streamers from the ceiling, while Emma and Noah carefully arranged balloons around the bed. The nurses joined in their small celebration, touched by the family's dedication to making each moment special. Margaret worked diligently on her legacy project, her hands sometimes shaking as she wrote letters to her grandchildren. "Remember to be kind," she wrote, "and always look for the good in others." Daniel helped her compile her favorite recipes, carefully transcribing her instructions and the special touches that made each dish unique. The hospital chaplain visited regularly, offering prayers and spiritual comfort. Margaret found peace in these quiet moments of reflection, often holding Daniel's hand as they prayed together. Her faith remained strong, providing comfort to both herself and her family. During one particularly lucid afternoon, Margaret shared stories of her marriage and early days with Daniel. "The moment I saw you," she told him, her eyes bright with memory, "I knew you were meant to be my son." Lily recorded these precious stories, preserving them for future generations. Emma and Noah set up an art station by Margaret's bed, bringing watercolors and colored pencils. Together, they created bright pictures of gardens and sunny days, Margaret guiding their strokes with gentle suggestions. These creative sessions brought joy to everyone involved, filling the room with laughter and light. The medical team adjusted Margaret's care plan with compassion and understanding. They focused on keeping her comfortable, managing her symptoms while supporting her emotional well-being. The nurses became like extended family, sharing in both difficult moments and small victories. During family gatherings, they would take turns sharing how Margaret had influenced their lives. "You taught me what real strength looks like," Lily said one afternoon, holding Margaret's hand. "Your kindness changed how I see the world." Despite her weakening condition, Margaret continued to show remarkable resilience. She faced each day with grace, offering smiles and words of encouragement to her family. When she expressed a wish to watch the sunset together, Daniel arranged for her bed to be moved near the window, where they gathered as a family to share in the beautiful moment. One evening, they arranged a special family dinner in Margaret's room. The hospital staff helped set up a small table, and Lily brought Margaret's favorite dishes from home. They sat together, holding hands around Margaret's bed, the room filled with the warmth of their love and shared memories. The hospital room settled into a peaceful calm as twilight painted the sky in soft purples and pinks. Margaret lay comfortably in her bed, her breathing steady but shallow. Daniel sat close by, holding her hand, while Lily arranged chairs for Emma and Noah near the bedside. The gentle hum of medical equipment provided a quiet backdrop to their evening together. Lily brought out small containers of homemade soup, passing them around to the family. Emma and Noah took turns sharing stories about their favorite memories with their grandmother, their young voices filling the room with warmth. Noah recalled the time Margaret taught him how to plant sunflowers, while Emma spoke of their baking adventures in the kitchen. Daniel leaned close to Margaret, his voice thick with emotion. "Mom," he whispered, "you gave me everything when you chose me as your son. Thank you for loving me, for showing me what family truly means." Margaret squeezed his hand weakly, her eyes filled with love. The family shared stories of Margaret's kindness, how she always remembered everyone's birthdays, her famous chocolate chip cookies, and the way she could make anyone feel special with just a smile. Lily held Emma and Noah close as they listened, offering gentle hugs when tears would fall. "Promise me," Margaret said softly, her voice barely above a whisper, "that you'll take care of each other. Stay close. Love deeply." Daniel nodded, unable to speak through his tears. As the evening progressed, Margaret's breathing became more labored. She looked at each family member with profound love, her eyes conveying what words could no longer express. The room fell into a peaceful silence, broken only by quiet sniffles and whispered words of love. With one final, gentle breath, Margaret slipped away. Her face remained serene, as if she had simply fallen into a peaceful sleep. Daniel held her hand tightly, tears streaming down his face. Lily wrapped her arms around him, while Emma and Noah pressed close, their small hands reaching for their grandmother. And the family stayed together, sharing in their grief through silent tears and tight embraces. They remembered Margaret's strength, her unwavering love, and the joy she brought to their lives. In the quiet of the room, they held each other close, honoring the peaceful passing of their beloved Margaret. With gentle movements, Daniel reached forward and softly closed his mother's eyes, completing their final farewell with this tender act of love. The Thompson home buzzed with quiet activity in the days following Margaret's passing. The familiar rooms felt different now, each corner holding memories that brought both comfort and pain. Daniel sat at the dining room table, surrounded by papers and funeral planning guides, his shoulders heavy with responsibility. In the living room, the family gathered for their first planning meeting. Lily brought notebooks and pens, while Emma and Noah settled onto the couch, clutching their grandmother's favorite throw pillow. "Mom would want something traditional," Daniel said softly, "but also personal. She always loved the old church on Mason Street." Lily nodded, making notes. "I'll start calling people today. We should include everyone who meant something to her." The following morning, Daniel met with Mr. Roberts, the funeral director, who guided them through the necessary arrangements with gentle patience. They discussed options for the service, settling on a combination of traditional elements and personal touches that would reflect Margaret's spirit. Emma and Noah contributed by selecting readings and songs. "Grandma loved Amazing Grace," Emma remembered, while Noah suggested including the poem Margaret often recited during family gatherings. The church coordinator, Mrs. Peterson, helped them arrange the details of the service. The old stone building held many memories of Margaret's involvement in the congregation, making it a fitting place for her final farewell. Friends and neighbors streamed in and out of the house, bringing food and offers of help. Mrs. Jenkins from next door organized a group to handle the reception, while Mr. Thompson from the garden club arranged for Margaret's favorite flowers to decorate the church. Each family member worked on their personal tributes. Daniel spent hours at his desk, writing and rewriting his eulogy, trying to capture the essence of the woman who had chosen him as her son. Lily collected stories and photographs for a memorial booklet, while Emma and Noah drew pictures and wrote simple, heartfelt messages about their beloved grandmother. As evening settled over the house, the family gathered in the living room. They sat together, holding hands in a circle, their hearts heavy but united in their love for Margaret. A framed photograph of her smiled down at them from the mantel, her eyes twinkling with the same warmth they all remembered so well. The morning sun painted golden streaks across the churchyard as people began arriving for Margaret's funeral. The old stone church stood sentinel against the pale blue sky, its doors open wide to welcome those who had come to pay their respects. Fresh flowers adorned the entrance, their sweet fragrance mingling with the crisp morning air. Daniel stood at the church steps, greeting guests with quiet dignity. Lily remained close by his side, her hand occasionally squeezing his arm in silent support. Emma and Noah stayed near their parents, dressed in their Sunday best, their young faces solemn yet brave. Inside, the church glowed with warm light filtering through stained glass windows. Photographs of Margaret's life lined the walls, snapshots of her gardening, laughing with family, and holding her grandchildren. Fresh flowers filled every corner, their vibrant colors a testament to Margaret's love of nature. As people settled into the wooden pews, soft organ music filled the air. The congregation rose as one when the first hymn began, their voices joining together in Amazing Grace, Margaret's favorite. The sound swelled to the rafters, carrying with it both sorrow and celebration. The officiant stepped forward, opening his Bible to read from Ecclesiastes, a passage Margaret had often quoted about seasons of life. His steady voice provided comfort to those gathered, especially as he spoke of faith and eternal love. One by one, family members and friends approached the pulpit to share their memories. Mrs. Jenkins spoke of Margaret's kindness as a neighbor, while Mr. Thompson from the garden club recalled her dedication to beautifying the community. Daniel's eulogy touched everyone deeply, as he spoke of Margaret's decision to adopt him, her unwavering support, and the profound impact she had on his life. Emma and Noah walked to the front together, holding hands. Emma read a poem she had written about afternoon tea with her grandmother, while Noah shared a simple story about helping Margaret in her garden. Their young voices, though trembling slightly, carried clearly through the hushed church. A moment of silence fell over the congregation, broken only by the distant sound of birds singing outside. The officiant led them in prayer, asking for comfort for those left behind and giving thanks for Margaret's life and legacy. The final hymn began, its melody carrying both sadness and hope. As the last notes faded, the congregation rose and began moving toward the cemetery, where Margaret would be laid to rest. The procession moved slowly through the churchyard, the morning sun now high overhead, casting dappled shadows through the trees. At the gravesite, fresh flowers surrounded the polished casket. The family gathered close, supporting one another as the officiant began the final prayers. Friends and loved ones stepped forward one by one, placing flowers and whispering their last goodbyes. In the reception hall, gentle murmurs filled the air as guests gathered around tables adorned with flowers that reminded everyone of Margaret's beloved garden. Plates clinked softly as people shared quiet conversations and memories of the woman who had touched so many lives. Daniel stood at the edge of the room, gathering his courage. His hands trembled slightly as he approached the podium, but his steps were steady. As he reached for the microphone, the conversations gradually hushed, and all eyes turned toward him. "Thank you all for being here today," he began, his voice soft but clear. "Your presence means more than words can express." He paused, drawing a deep breath before continuing. "My mother, Margaret, was an extraordinary woman who chose me, loved me, and shaped me into the person I am today." As he spoke, memories flooded through his words. He told them about the day Margaret adopted him, about her unwavering support through every challenge, and the countless small moments that revealed her generous heart. His voice grew stronger as he shared stories of her resilience, how she faced every obstacle with grace and found joy in life's simplest pleasures. "Many of you have shared stories with me," Daniel continued, gesturing to the gathered faces. "Stories of how she helped during difficult times, how she always had an extra plate at her dinner table, how her garden became a sanctuary for anyone needing peace." His eyes met those of various community members who nodded in recognition. Turning to his family, Daniel's voice softened. "To my wife, Lily, and our children, Emma and Noah, thank you for helping make Mom's final day so beautiful. Your love and support meant everything to her." Tears welled in his eyes as he spoke of Margaret's legacy. "My mother taught us that love is a choice we make every day. She chose love consistently, unfailingly, even in her hardest moments. That is the legacy she leaves us, to choose love, to find joy, to lift others up." Daniel's voice cracked slightly as he reached for his glass of champagne. "To Margaret Thompson," he said, raising it high, "a mother by choice, a friend to all, and a light that will continue to shine in our hearts." The room rose as one, glasses lifted in tribute. Through his tears, Daniel saw countless faces reflecting the same love and gratitude he felt for Margaret. The applause that followed wrapped around him like an embrace, carrying both comfort and recognition of the truth in his words. In the days following Margaret's funeral, the community's love for her became increasingly evident. The local community center buzzed with activity as people worked together to organize various tributes and memorial events. Every day more stories emerged about Margaret's impact on individual lives. At the community memorial service, the large hall filled quickly. Pictures of Margaret lined the walls, showing her warm smile and kind eyes. A projector displayed a touching tribute video, featuring candid moments of Margaret gardening, laughing with neighbors, and helping at local events. Sarah Miller, who lived next door to Margaret for 20 years, stood at the podium with tears in her eyes. "Margaret wasn't just a neighbor," she shared, her voice trembling. "She was there for me during my battle with cancer, bringing meals and tending my garden when I couldn't." The community's response to Margaret's passing extended beyond words. In the local park, volunteers gathered to plant a memorial garden. They carefully selected her favorite flowers, bright yellow daffodils and purple irises. Daniel watched as Emma and Noah helped plant the flowers, their small hands carefully patting the soil around each stem. A local charity drive, inspired by Margaret's generous spirit, raised funds for the community center's after-school program. "Margaret always believed in nurturing young minds," explained Tom Roberts, the center's director. "This fund will help continue her legacy of supporting children in need." The art gallery downtown hosted an exhibition titled Memories of Margaret. Local artists contributed paintings and sculptures that captured her essence, from peaceful garden scenes to portraits that highlighted her gentle spirit. Lily stood before a particularly moving piece, a watercolor of Margaret reading to Emma and Noah in her garden. Online tributes poured in from those who couldn't attend in person. The community Facebook page filled with photos and stories, each one highlighting a different facet of Margaret's kindness. Letters and cards arrived daily at the Thompson home, sharing memories and offering comfort. The city council approved the installation of a commemorative bench in Margaret's favorite spot in the park, overlooking the duck pond where she often sat with her grandchildren. The simple plaque read, "In memory of Margaret Thompson, a heart that touched many." Inspired by her example, several community members started a volunteer program called Margaret's Helpers, dedicated to assisting elderly neighbors with daily tasks. The initiative quickly gained momentum, embodying Margaret's spirit of community service. The community center buzzed with quiet anticipation as people filled every available seat. Photos of Margaret adorned the walls, her warm smile captured in moments of joy with family and friends. Fresh flowers perfumed the air, their bright colors reflecting Margaret's vibrant spirit. Daniel stood at the podium, his hands slightly trembling as he adjusted the microphone. The room fell silent, all eyes focused on him as he cleared his throat. "Thank you all for being here today," he began, his voice steady despite the emotion building in his chest. "The outpouring of love and support from this community has been overwhelming." He paused, gathering his thoughts before continuing. "When I was 8 years old, Margaret took me into her home and her heart. I remember that first night, scared and uncertain, but she sat beside my bed and read stories until I fell asleep. That was who she was, someone who gave her whole heart without hesitation." Daniel's voice grew stronger as he shared more memories. Every Saturday morning, she would wake up early to volunteer at the local shelter. She'd pack extra sandwiches, saying, "There's always someone who needs a little more." Even on her hardest days, she thought of others first. Tears welled in his eyes as he continued. "She taught me what it means to be truly selfless. When I struggled in school, she spent countless hours helping me study. When I doubted myself, her faith in me never wavered. Everything I am today I owe to her love and guidance." His voice cracked slightly as he spoke about her illness. Even in her final months, Mom never lost her spirit. She faced each day with grace and determination, still more concerned about others than herself. Her strength was remarkable. Daniel gripped the podium tighter, emotion overwhelming him momentarily. "Mom, thank you. Thank you for choosing me, for loving me, for showing me what it means to live a life of purpose and kindness. Your legacy lives on in every life you touched, in every person you helped, in every smile you shared." Wiping away tears, he raised his glass. "To Margaret Thompson, a mother, a friend, and an inspiration to us all. May we honor her memory by living as she did, with open hearts and endless love." The room erupted in applause as Daniel stepped down from the podium. Lily wrapped her arms around him, and Emma and Noah pressed close, their family united in their love and grief. Community members rose to their feet, many wiping away tears as they continued to applaud. If you enjoyed the story of Margaret and Daniel, I handpicked this next story that you will enjoy. Please don't miss this one. Click here to watch it.